Today we're going to talk about Christopher Columbus Day, Indigenous People Day, or is it changed back to Christopher Columbus Day? But for centuries, Christopher Columbus has been hailed the man who discovered America. It's a foundational myth that was taught in schools, but the truth is far darker, and the identity of Christopher Columbus is more complex. This is the real history of Christopher Columbus. The most widely accepted historical consensus of Christopher Columbus, he was from Genoa, which was an independent maritime republic located in Italy. He was born around 1451 and the son of a wool weaver. He spent his early life selling and working on trading voyages throughout the Mediterranean and into the Atlantic Ocean. By the late 15th century, European powers were desperate for a new profitable trade route to Asia, the Indies, to access valuable spices, silk, and gold without having to deal with the overland routes controlled by others. Portugal had cornered the market by selling south and east around Africa. Columbus had a radical idea. The earth was a sphere, so he could sail west across the Atlantic to reach the east. He greatly miscalculated the size of the earth, believing that the distance to be much shorter than it actually was, and not knowing an entire continent lay in his path. Christopher Columbus spent years pitching his plan, but most experts saw his math as flawed and rejected it. Finally, in 1492, he persuaded Queen Isabella I and the King of Spain to fund his voyage. They were driven by the desire for wealth, national glory, and the religious zeal to spread Christianity. In return, Columbus was promised a percentage of any profits and the titles of Admiral of the Ocean Sea and Viceroy of any lands he claimed. On August 3rd, 1492, he set sail with 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, not a discovery. On October 12th, 1492, after 36 days at sea, Columbus and his crew made landfall. The traditional narrative claims he discovered America. That is simply not the truth. Long before Christopher Columbus, the continent had already been home to millions of people belonging to rich and diverse civilizations. Second, even among Europeans, the Norse Viking explorer Leif Erikson is widely believed to have reached North America centuries earlier, around the year of 1000, establishing a brief settlement in what is now known as Canada. Columbus' arrival initiated sustained European contact with the Americas, but he never even set foot on the mainland of what now is known as the United States of America. His voyages landed him on the islands in the Caribbean, including the Bahamas, Cuba, Haiti, and Dominican Republic, and later parts of Central and South America. He believed until his death that he had reached the eastern edges of Asia. He was an accidental invader, not a discoverer. The crimes that were committed by Christopher Columbus and the people that he encountered on the islands, the Taino, described in his own journals as gentle and peaceful and generous. Yet within hours of meeting them, Columbus began planning their demise. The first and most devastating act was the immediate seizure and enslavement of indigenous people. Columbus's primary goal was profit, and he quickly turned to human trafficking when gold was not immediately found. On his second voyage, he shipped hundreds of Taino people back to Spain as slaves, and many died en route. Once he established the colony of La Isabela on Haiti, he instituted a brutal system known as the tribute system. Every Taino person over the age of 14 was forced to collect a certain amount of gold every 3 months. The gold on this island was very scarce, making the quota particularly impossible. Those who failed were subjected to horrific torture, including having their hands cut off, leading them to bleed to death. On several different accounts from a priest, he described witnessing the extreme cruelty of the Spaniards that were taking place on the indigenous people within the island that could not reach these unsustainable goals. Columbus' reign as the governor of the Indies was marked by systematic violence, often deployed to instill terror and crush resistance. His men R-word women, murdered children, and used indigenous people as dog food for their attack dogs. The most tragic consequence was the total decimation of the population on the island. Though a combination of slaughter, forced labor, famine, and European diseases to which the indigenous people had no immunity, the people of Haiti were virtually wiped out within a few decades. Estimates suggest the original population of hundreds of thousands or even a million was reduced to a few hundred by 1550. This was an act of genocide. Columbus's abuses were so extreme that he was eventually arrested by Spanish authorities. In 1500, he was stripped of his title as governor and sent back to Spain in chains after numerous complaints of his brutality and mismanagement. He was later pardoned by the king, but never regained his governing powers. After being arrested and pardoned 6 years later, Christopher Columbus died in 1506, still believing he had opened a direct route to Asia. His voyages did not discover America, but they launched the Columbian Exchange and a massive transfer of plants, animals, culture, and critically infectious diseases between the old and new worlds. Today, many cities and states have rightly replaced Columbus Day with Indigenous People Day, shifting the focus from the controversial figure of the conqueror to the enduring survival of the heritage of people who were there first. His history is not one of heroic discovery, but of colonization, enslavement, and the catastrophic beginning of the conquest of the Americas. What we did here today was we stripped away the myth of the heroic discovery to reveal the true history of Christopher Columbus, a desperate merchant who accidentally landed in the Caribbean and not in Asia. His arrival in 1492 wasn't a discovery. It was the beginning of a bloodthirst conquest with greed being driven behind everyone. On this Columbus Day, you have to ask yourself these 5 questions. And if any of these answers are yes, then maybe Christopher Columbus was a good guy. Did Christopher Columbus discover a previously uninhabited continent? No. Was Christopher Columbus successful in reaching Asia, his intended destination? No. Did he establish humane, fair government in the lands he claimed? No. Did the Spanish crown ultimately approve of his methods and management? No. Is the history of Christopher Columbus one of heroic discovery? No. Again, this is the truth behind Christopher Columbus. So why does the dark truth about Christopher Columbus matter to the United States? Because his conquest to the Caribbean wasn't an isolated event. They were the brutal testing ground for the entire colonization of the Americas. Now ask yourself, why were we told the myth and not the murder? The story of the heroic discoverer that was deliberately promoted to create a national origin myth. The myth served a powerful purpose. It justified the conquest of North America and the displacement of the native population. You can't celebrate the acquisition of land and power while teaching children that the man who started it all was a brutal governor and a slave trader. To admit the truth would be to undermine the entire foundation of the colonial enterprise. And you know America can't tell us the truth. My name is Mo.J. If you like this kind of content, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. This is the Mo You Know. Happy Christopher Columbus Day.